Good Friday Agreement is an incredibly delicately constructed thing, and Brexit threw a hammer into it. Getting rid of the ECHR is further damage, and I think that kind of risk assessment around how it impacts the Good Friday Agreement clearly wasn't carried out by anybody who's pushing this issue. It's an immigration. For example, tomorrow in Brussels, there will be a briefing of the EU ambassadors. And on Tuesday, myself and other MEPs will be briefed by Maros Sefcovic in a format that's known as the UK Contact Group in the European Parliament. And that hasn't met for quite a long time. So when you get summoned to the UK Contact Group, you know that there's something happening. And obviously the mood is very positive. The data sharing agreement that we had last month is evidence of that. And the mood music is right. There's trust there. And frankly, there's stability on the UK side, which has been missing for some time. So, but as we all know, the major challenge will be how and whether the British government can deliver this in respect to their ERG and the DUP and the wider unionist community in Northern Ireland.
Oh, there's so much to unpick there, but I'm fascinated that you're saying that this summons to the UK Contact Group is a real moment. So do you think there could be some movement on this as early as this week, potentially?
It's hard to say. I mean, unless you have an EU spy balloon floating over these talks.
Well, it might get shot down.
You might get. It's very hard to know, but I'm just, the European Parliament is, not that high up in the food chain when it comes to decision making on this process. The member states give the mandate to the negotiators, and we are briefed from time to time. But the fact that we are summoned does indicate that things are moving and there's something coming. But whether it will be as soon as next week, I just don't know. I really, really hope it is, because then there is more work to be done selling this in Westminster and selling this in Belfast with all the parties. But I think one of the things that's different this time is that there's been a much greater effort to circle back with the DUP and the wider unionist community than had been the case, for example, when the current protocol was agreed in October 2019. That was kind of done to the unionist community, and that wasn't a good way to do things. But I think there's much better efforts to try to ensure that at least the DUP and unionism are briefed on what's happening, insofar as that's possible.
Well, that's interesting because, of course, one of the issues that Rishi Sunak has is that even when there is an agreement, he will have to sell it. You mentioned it there, politically in Westminster. And, his own party and the DUP, it sounds this morning in some of the papers like they are considering, teaming up to force a vote on the so-called express, lanes, the green lanes, the method of customs checks. Do you think that it's possible for Rishi Sunak to sell this, given what you've just said about the way that these negotiations have taken into account some of the concerns on the DUP side?
Well, there's a lot of moving parts in that. I mean, it's what power does Rishi Sunak have? What leverage does he have? But ultimately, if you want to put Northern Ireland at the centre of this, if you want to put the peace process and preserving the Good Friday Agreement at the centre of this, young people in Northern Ireland, civil society in Northern Ireland, they keep telling me, look, could everybody realise this is going to require compromise? It's not going to be perfect for any single group. It's going to be messy. It's going to require all sides to pull back from some of the red lines. And so what I'm hearing this week is, when the DUP talk about their 7 tests, I think there's an acknowledgement that there's flexibility within those 7 tests, that there are ways in which we can move. We can't agree to everything that has been demanded by the DUP, but I believe there is sufficient flexibility. But the key issue, I'm not good. I don't know enough about Westminster, but the key issue for the DUP is how they're able to manage the messaging around this, whether they'll be able to exercise influence over their hinterland, by which I mean the Orange Order, the Loyalist Community Council, the TUV even, and some of the more strident voices on social media. And all of that is a difficulty for the DUP.
Do you think the DUP are in a position or are prepared now to compromise? Because they haven't always been before.
It's very hard to read it. And as you say, yes, Jeffrey Donaldson, when he was in the Ulster Unionist Party, resigned on the day the Good Friday Agreement was signed 25 years ago almost. So it will be a difficult ask. But I think what I'm getting from reading the tea leaves really is that there is quite a bit of creativity going into how this is going to be packaged and the messaging around it. There's been a lot of insensitivity talking about green lanes and red lanes. That annoys a lot of people talking about green lanes in Northern Ireland. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you don't live there. Calling them border checks between GB and I is also really annoys the unionists, even though there is no border between GB and I. There's a border on the island of Ireland. The genius of the Good Friday Agreement is that it's virtually invisible. So we need to move away from some of the language that is causing problems. But of course, there has to be substance to it. The DUP concerns have to be addressed, and there has to be some way of helping them to sell this to their own community.
Can I ask you, do you think, just stepping back a little bit, that we are in this position now because you have Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister and, of course, the ministers that he's chosen in his cabinet, as opposed to, whoever was in Downing Street before? Has that changed the tone?
Well, the personalities at the time, I was very, very pleased to see Chris Heaton-Harris being appointed as Secretary of State, and Steve Baker as well, who would have been high priests of Brexit back in the day, because clearly they were going to be continually brought along by the issue. As regards Rishi Sunak, it's not so much the personalities as the stability. And the problem the European Union has faced in recent times is that whatever concession is made by the European Union has been trousered by the UK government and then not implemented, and the British government come back for more. And that's a characteristic of a very unstable political scene. I mean, that's not a controversial thing to say. It has been very unstable in the UK, and therefore it'll be very difficult to build up the trust needed in order to deliver an actually implementable agreement. But I think we're in that space now, not necessarily because of Rishi Sunak or the personalities, but just the very stability of the current political ecosystem in the UK.
So I presume you would think that the intervention of Liz Truss this morning, which may well create more instability, wouldn't necessarily be helpful?
No, I don't. I mean, Liz Truss introduced the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill 12 months ago to inoculate herself against attacks within the Tory civil wars to try and set up her leadership. So Northern Ireland came very low down her list of considerations in the steps that she took. So I would take with a very large pinch of salt any intervention from Liz Truss at this time. I think it's not helpful to have that, and what has been a characteristic of the debate actually over the last few weeks and before Christmas is that there has been forbearance from many of the senior people to allow the space for an agreement to emerge. There's been very little leaking to the media, and therefore that's what you generally see just before an agreement is arrived at.
Yeah, and just finally, how do you feel then about the story on the front page of the Sunday Times today about the potential for the UK to withdraw from the ECHR? This is around, of course, channel migrants, but in terms of the mood music, that must worry you slightly. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's the ECHR is baked into the Good Friday Agreement. That again is something that's not fully understood in London, and the rights that are guaranteed under the European Convention on Human Rights are mentioned a number of times in the Good Friday Agreement. So for the UK to unilaterally withdraw from the Convention and the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights has implications for the Good Friday Agreement. And unfortunately, the Good Friday Agreement is an incredibly delicately constructed thing, and Brexit threw a hammer into it. Getting rid of the ECHR is further damage, and I think that kind of risk assessment around how it impacts the Good Friday Agreement clearly wasn't carried out by anybody who's pushing this issue. It's an immigration, looked at through an immigration lens, but not through a lens of wider peace and prosperity in Northern Ireland.